Rome is where empires come to die, where emperors are humbled. You remember Canossa, where even modern politicians, actually in Canossa it's really the Pope who's humbled, where even modern politicians discover that they are not the centre of the moral universe. And this Easter, all eyes are going to turn not only to the cross, but to the curious convergence of politics and faith unfolding in the Eternal City, as Vice President J.D. Vance, a Catholic convert and a chief architect of America's post-liberal right, has spent the holiest days of the Christian calendar in Rome, navigating the marble corridors of the Vatican, and more subtly the doctrinal friction between his administration's ideology and Pope Francis's moral vision. As the Pope, recovering from double pneumonia, prepares, God and doctors willing, to deliver the Urbi et Orbi blessing in a couple of hours' time on Easter Sunday, we are offered a parable, not just about the resurrection, but about contested authority, competing theologies, and the clashing views of charity. Let's begin with the extraordinary tradition, the Urbi et Orbi, to the city and the world. This is the Pope's preeminent annual address, a declaration of hope and an invocation of peace, customarily delivered from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica to tens of thousands of pilgrims and millions more watching around the globe. And this year Pope Francis, frail but resolute, has insisted, despite medical advice, on attempting to appear. Why? Because silence in the face of global pain, of war, of moral confusion would itself be a form of abdication. The Urbi et Orbi is not a mere ceremonial pomp and a mere display of ceremonial pomp. It's a theological act of presence, and it's Francis saying, I'm still here. The church is still here, and God is not finished with this world yet. And then there's J.D. Vance, the populist prince of the American right, whose visit to the Vatican this weekend was at once diplomatic and deeply personal. Vance, who once described himself as a baby Catholic, met with Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, and Archbishop Paul Gallagher, the Foreign Minister. And Pope Francis, while recovering, didn't officially meet Vance, though rumours of a private greeting linger. And the visit came under a cloud. Francis had already issued a direct theological correction to Vance earlier this year, rebuking his invocation of Ordo Amoris, the medieval order of love, which Vance had used to justify Trump's harsh immigration policy. The Pope countered, Christian love is not a concentric hierarchy of loyalty, but a fraternity open to all without exception. In other words, charity begins at home, but it cannot end there. The ideological fault line is clear beyond Ordo Amoris. Francis, rooted in Jesuit social teaching and liberation theology, sees migration as a spiritual duty, a way to encounter Christ in the stranger. Vance, by contrast, represents a resurgent nationalism cloaked in theological terms. He sees statecraft as moral triage, care for one's own first, with limited sympathy for the global poor. Theologically, this is a tug-of-war between Matthew 25, I was a stranger and you welcomed me, and Cicero light, realpolitik. Vance's Catholicism is sincere but instrumental. His brand of post-liberal Catholicism imagines a righteous takeover of state institutions, reshaping law and society through traditionalist doctrine. The Vatican, whose very diplomacy depends on universality, views this with wariness. Its Easter message is global. His is nationalist. Their concord is polite but brittle. There's also global politics in the incense. Vance discussed Ukraine with Vatican officials, but his tone diverges from Francis's persistent advocacy for Kyiv's sovereignty. Where Parolin insisted peace cannot be imposed on Ukraine, Vance hinted, perhaps prematurely, at optimism for a negotiated end. All this comes as President Trump prepares to return to Europe with looming tariffs, renewed criticism of NATO, and a general disdain for multilateral institutions. For Francis, who has invested moral capital in peace diplomacy, the second Trump presidency presents a unique ecclesiastical headache. Pope Francis is 88. He's been hospitalized for over a month. He is visibly weakened. Yet his insistence on appearing at Urbi et Orbi is itself an act of resistance, not to Vance per se, but to cynicism, to the creeping authoritarianism he sees in many world leaders, and to the notion that the vulnerable are expendable. His visit to Rome's prison on Holy Thursday, on Maundy Thursday, though he could not perform the foot-washing ritual, was a deliberate message. Proximity to the marginalised is not symbolic, it's foundational. So what will Easter Sunday bring? We may see Francis, weathered and breathless, step onto that balcony and speak, not as a politician, but as the Bishop of Rome, bearing a message of hope to the world. I think it's more likely that a cardinal will read his message in detail and Francis will deliver the blessing itself. But if Vance is watching, as one imagines he will be, he will witness a faith that is not post-liberal or pre-liberal, but radically Catholic, small c and capital C. This Easter, then, is not just a liturgical moment, it's a spiritual referendum between a church of borders and a church of bridges, and between those who seek to sanctify exclusion and those who find God in the embrace of the excluded. In Rome, power walks beside humility. For every Easter, we're reminded that resurrection doesn't come through empire, but through sacrifice, solidarity, and love without condition.